Hello again, everybody. It is Jared Powers, technical representative for Tamron USA, coming back to you for another 5 after 5. And this time, instead of my personal favorite images, I'm going to look at 5 different images that have greatly changed our world and have impacted our photography or our view of photography in many different ways. Um, Before we get started, I want to let you know that your opinions are valuable too. If you look through here and you see other images that maybe remind you of different things, or maybe in your opinion are more important, don't hesitate to use the comment section down below. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you've seen, and we'll go from there. Before I get too into this, there are a couple images of graphic nature, so I just want to give you that heads up. Nothing too over the top, though, just a slight warning. So thank you for being here with us. Let's get started. Photography begins to run. Since its inception in the early 1800s, 1822, we were struggling to take images of movement. Still lifes were good enough, but we didn't always have the light or the different photographic methods that allowed us to photograph at a much higher speed. It wasn't until Edward Muybridge in 1878 who gave us this beautiful set of images about a horse by the name of Occident, who was owned by Leland Stanford, the former governor of California. And Mr. Stanford believed that photography at the time did not accurately reflect what his horse was capable of. And of course, as every horse owner knows their horse is a winner on the track, and that's all that matters. And so Mr. Stanford greatly wanted to employ that and show the world that his horse was much more of a champion than current photography had allowed. So they took a test run in the early 1870s, and while it was better than what they had seen previously, it still wasn't the image that they were looking for. And then in 1878, Mr. Muybridge had finally come up with the image we see in front of us, but a process for actually achieving these results that was tested and could be continually used. And that was a test of using multiple cameras. In this case, 12 different frames, 12 different cameras for the first run. And in his second major run for the public, he had 24 cameras. And this is a carte de vis that he made. This is from 1879 as compared to the photograph from 1878, where this does show that he is an official photographer for the US government. And he is patent approved in the United States as well as England and France. And this was our inception of uh, high frame rate photography. So after that, some hard lessons for humankind. Not all of these images not all these images throughout time did good in a way we wanted them to. Mr. Lewis Hahn went all over the United States photographing children that were working in all kinds of factories and warehouses and things of that nature. This wasn't an easy task. He had to attempt to sneak in, pretend to represent somebody else, and just no one really wanted to see him in their factory because he was spelling the end of child labor. And shortly afterwards, the National Child Labor Committee was created, and he was then one of the first photographers for them and continued this work around the country. This is a young girl in a wool mill up in Vermont in 1908. And he was affected by a lot of what he saw. By the time he was done, he tried to get his images a little farther out into the world to see who might want to take his collection, and he was turned down by quite a few people. And unfortunately, Mr. Hine ended up dying shortly after a surgery, fairly alone, penniless. He lost his house in the end, and was not the best of situations for someone who had done so much positive for our country and indeed for the world when it came to child labor and child labor relations at the time and things of that nature. So hats off to him. It's very easy to say that in after the fact, but it's these pictures right here that help change our perception of how young you could be to to get a job and receive a paycheck. Human expansion on the largest scales. When we think about this, I can think of all kinds of industrial photographers who have done wonderful things, shown us all these big machines, and or landscape photographers who have shown us these great viewpoints out into the world. I know even as I look up out my window, I can see for quite a few miles. Um, but nowhere in the world except for here would you see this. Um, this was determined to be an Apollo 8 photograph by astronaut William Anders. There was some confusion in the beginning, and they sorted that out. It was called Earthrise. And we, as humans and NASA aficionados, generally do believe that this was the first photograph, and this is the first time we saw that quote blue marble, where we realized how small and our little world was, and that we needed to protect it and treat it a little bit better than maybe we had been at the time, or we would come to discover. But this wasn't the first photograph of this. It was actually a very similar photograph, yet in black and white, by the Lunar Orbiter 1, which was a robotic reconnaissance spacecraft that we sent around the moon in 1966. And that was our first glimpse back at our world. But as you can see, it's much more empowering and powerful when you see it in blue as we know it. When we look up into the sky and see our white clouds and our blue skies, we know which marble is ours. So I know this has affected almost everyone. I would hope that it has in some way. Looking up at the sky and the stars is one thing that all human beings share, and so that is why I chose this one as quite a powerful, powerful image. Now, sometimes there are harder lessons than just child labor, and this is where it might get a little trickier. There are two images here. First one was titled Saigon Execution by Mr. Eddie Adams, and it was a photograph that Eddie never really wanted to be known for. Um, Unfortunately, Eddie believed that the minute he took this photograph, which he did not realize until he got home and got it developed, that um, this man had taken this man's life, and that his image was going to end up in the end taking the man with the gun's life as well, which was true. The gentleman holding the gun actually immigrated to America and tried to do his best to forget, um, until they discovered that each other were in the same country, and they became friends and they apologized. Eddie was always very passionate about, he did not mean to hurt this gentleman. He did not mean to apply the pressure to his life that his photograph did. And even though people in the news desk at the time tried to balance this image off with other images, it never really worked. This became a very painful, painful image for both men, who are no longer with us, unfortunately. So then many of us, because this is a newer photograph, will remember Tank Man from the Tiananmen Square riots in 1989. Um, Jeff Widner was over there, and it was so hard to get imagery out from behind that red curtain, whether it was video or stills. And so a lot of what we have is anecdotal evidence from various photojournalists about what did happen, about this man stepping out and the tank trying to move, and he would step in front of it in another direction to get it to stop. And at one point, the man did climb up on the tank and try and speak with the gentleman who's running the tank, and you can kind of see him popping his head up out of the first tank, trying to talk to him. Um, it never really worked out. He was carried off eventually by a couple of men in blue suits. To this day, we still do not know what happened to who the man was or what happened to him. We do know him to be a symbol for that Chinese revolt and how the people wanted their freedoms, but yet it was quashed. So those are just two good times where there are plenty of war photographs that may have affected us more, but these are two that have kind of affected the world, or worldwide known images. So looking into the future, it's not all doom and gloom. Sometimes I know sometimes photography does that to us, whether it's artistically with a very emotional laden images, or whether it is photojournalistic images showing us moments in time that were not always positive. This next image is going to be a little different. This is a picture of the black hole at the center of Galaxy M87 taken by NASA just last year. This was the first time that we have ever been able to photograph a black hole because it is invisible to the naked eye. And it's essentially the closest, I believe, we've come to photographing gravity in this type of setting. This was huge for science. This is amazing for us to finally be able to put a lot of X-ray data together from the Event Horizon Telescope. And I think we take that term for granted. Event Horizon Telescope isn't one telescope. It is actually 8 that are scattered around the world in different countries and owned by different countries. But yet they work together, they coalesce their data and put it all together. And we were actually, as a species, able to see this and kind of understand aspects of outer space that we have not been able to understand before. And I remember seeing this image last year, and it's a little confusing. If you're a really scientific person, I'm sure it might bring you more joy than some of us lay people who are not physicists or astrophysicists. To us, it just looks like a donut with a little extra glaze on one side. But that indeed is not the case. And with this photograph, it sparked a lot of hope inside of me about the future and what our photography will be able to do. Um, I had always heard that the gentleman who created the CMOS sensor has been working on a process where there is a sensor that reads every photon that hits the sensor. And to me, that's just amazing. Every little spark of light you could record and what you could do with it. So from technology like a light field camera, well, from 35 millimeter to larger film bases to light field photography, and now on to this type of space age X-ray photography is pretty amazing in my eyes. And I look forward to seeing what NASA is going to provide for us in the future. So that is my top 5 at 5, some of the 5 greatest images to affect our world. Again, if you've got any other comments or thoughts, please throw them down below. We're always here, open to listen. I hope everyone is staying safe out there. We do miss you out in the field. We're going to get out there as soon as we can. Thank you again for your time and support, and please keep yourself and your family safe out there. Bye-bye.